When the Sony ZV-E1 camera came out, it released a bunch of new features that I've literally never even seen on the camera market, from the cinema line cameras to the basic entry-level cameras. Nobody did this, and this camera is catered to video content creators. Now, there are 12 settings that over the last several months since I have been using this camera non-stop, whether it be vlogging, live stream, workshops, training, podcasts, micro content, you name it, I have made it with the Sony ZV-E1, and this is coming out on similar cameras as well, like the Sony A6700. Now, I can't verify with the exact certainty that it's on all of the new Sony releases, but you can probably find most of these, and for sure it's going to be on the Sony ZV-E1. So let's dive into these 12 settings that have made video content creation that much easier. First and foremost is going to be the automatic ISO range. I love to use this whenever I'm vlogging because I don't always want to specifically customize every little thing. Sometimes if I'm running in between the airport, I really don't have time to sit and fiddle with settings for a few minutes here or there, because that definitely adds up over the course of the day. And automatic doesn't mean fully automatic settings. It could be shutter priority or aperture priority, or you do like the intelligent auto, which, quiet as kept, actually does a really good job with the various settings. But I don't want this camera going all the way to the stratosphere for the ISO. So what I can do is go into the auto ISO settings and then select what do I want the lowest ISO number to be and what do I want the highest ISO to be. For example, if I know I'm going someplace and it's sunny outside, like when I was in San Diego, or if it's an overcast day and maybe I need it to reach a bit higher, but I want it to stop at the cleanest point for the ISO, because one of the other settings is going to be something that you want to change as well. We'll talk about that in a second. Then I can customize what I want the lowest point and the highest point for the ISO settings to be, or just let it range from the lowest to the highest that the camera is actually capable of. But I like to use this and customize this while I'm on the go. And so this has made vlogging and just on the go content creation that much easier. The second feature is going to be the shot marker, which this has been my favorite to use. And it is one of those on-screen options that you would see the button, you're not really sure what it is. And unless you're going through the Sony camera menus, like I am, if you're super nerdy and techie, then you're not going to know that this setting even exists. Most people aren't even talking about it. But what this shot marker allows for you to do is 3 different options that can be super helpful depending on your use case. The first one is going to be while I'm actively recording. Sometimes I make mistakes, like I've done in this video already, or I misspeak, or I sneeze, or I need to pause for the plane. In camera, I don't have the ability to pause like I can inside of Ecamm Live. So what I'll do is hit the button on the camera screen, and this S1 will let me start adding markers to my timeline on the actual camera. The second thing that you can use the shot marker for is while you're going through playback. A lot of times we know what the good take was versus the bad take, and usually the good take is the last take. So I can scroll through my timeline on the camera, figure out where my starting point and my end point was for the video, and put shot markers there. So either I can send those notes when I'm uploading the video files to my video editor so he knows, so we don't have to waste any additional time. And there's a time saving technique that's also a part of this video that I'm gonna be sharing as well, that again, completely brand new. I've never seen anything like this before. And then the third part with the shot markers is that the shot markers allow you to export it to your phone and decide if you want to do 15 or 30-second cuts, which is the next bit on these 12 different settings. Because if you already know that you're making micro content and it's going to be kind of time constrained, you can use the shot markers to say if you want it to be 15 or 30 seconds and where you want this to be, export that to your phone. And whether you're using the native built-in like TikTok or YouTube Shorts built-in apps to make those changes, this cuts down on what you have to do inside of any editing program on the computer. You can just keep it all from your phone to your camera, and that's it. The fourth one is something that is transitioned down from the A7S Mark III. And all of this stuff that I'm talking about, for the most part, most of it, like 80% of the stuff I'm talking about in this video is not even available on that camera. And this feature thankfully came down from the A7S Mark III, which is the Shockless white balance. Now, usually when you're doing automatic white balance, when you're going from in a hotel to an event space or outside, the white balance is adjusting. And one of the things that I noticed, unfortunately, because I didn't know about this setting at the time, on the A7 Mark IV, the ISO and the white balance would change too rapidly. And yes, you can go in and customize stuff, but what the Shockless white balance allows for you to do is make that more gradual. So we can go from a very warm and tungsten type look to something that's very cool, closer to daylight, or it just depends if like you're in the shade and it's kind of like bluish, and it just more gradually does, so it's not as shocking. So this Shockless white balance is bee's knees Hall of Fame, and it works really good when you're on the go content creating. Next up, we have the dual base ISO. Now, this isn't something that you probably haven't heard of before on the Sony ZV-E1. Dual native ISO means we have two set numbers where the ISO is going to produce a clean look. So I could be at 10,000 ISO in S-Log3, for example, but then that second dual native ISO could be 12,800. The difference is when I go from 10,000 to 12,800, all of a sudden the image goes from being very noisy and busy to extremely clean. And this is available in more than just S-Log3, but because most of the content that you probably are watching around these cameras are really only filmmakers, sometimes videographers or what have you, they're not using some of the other settings that are available that could just be super easy for video content creators. And you get dual native ISO in a lot of these picture profiles. It just depends. So we'll flash it up on the screen and make this also available with the download link down in the description if you want to get access to this for free. No clicks, no emails, just put the image on the screen, but I'll make it available on the website so you can get it. Now, it's no surprise for a lot of creators that the 4K 30 in this camera is dope. It looks great and the quality is amazing, but it comes with a little bit of a caveat, and this can be a positive or negative. It just depends on how you look at it. Now, depending on what USB cable that you have available to you, you actually get different quality of the USB-C live streaming in the camera. Now, it doesn't matter if you're using an external program like an Ecamm Live or if you're doing this specifically out of the camera, but for the basis of this video, let's just stick to straight out of the camera. If you use a USB-C cable that is not fast enough, what you'll find is that you get 720p 30, and you can't get anything higher than that because the cable cannot transfer the data fast enough. Or you've plugged it into a port on your computer or some kind of a third-party device. It could be like a cow digit, but maybe it's just a slow port or something. It just depends. But if you plug it into something that can't actually handle those higher 4K 30 speeds at what the camera's trying to do, you're going to get stuck at that 720p 30. And what I've noticed is that you do not get access to your picture profiles. Like I use my customized profile and our custom LUT that we do just to get a basic look, but just like a clean, simple look here. I can't do this when I'm live streaming if I don't have the right cable. But if you have a good cable, like I use my Condor Blue USB-C cable, then I do have access to the 4K 30, and I can make sure that while I'm streaming at those speeds, I'm also staying consistent with the data so it's no droppage or it looks weird and choppy and stuff like that. Now, I recently just made a video on if you are having glitchy issues with your videos via USB-C, or even if you're just live streaming straight out the camera, what you need to do. So I'll put that up in the information card, but it does make a difference, and it is a little bit more than just the cable. Now, this next one is something that not a lot of people think about, but that is the ability to customize your proxy files. And this is something I do believe is coming down again from the A7S3 FX3 lineup, because you do get a ton of video customization with those cameras. But in the Sony ZV-E1 and some of the other similar cameras, but again, for the folks of this video, I'm going to stick with the Sony ZV-E1, I can actually choose how high of a resolution that I want this video. And that's pretty much like having two recording files at the same time, because it is. So not only do I get the 4K 422 10-bit Bee's Knees Hall of Fame video file that's extremely high quality, but I can actually kick out a lower resolution 1080p file if I want to, or 720p if you're solely using this just for, needing to make proxy files. What I can do is take that 1080p file and actually use this to share on my Instagram stories, use this to share on any of my vertical video content, and nobody's none the wiser, because there are literally people that only record in 1080p, and with a good quality lens and good lighting, nobody's none the wiser. And we're actually doing a video that we'll put in the information card as well on how you can link these internal Sony Proxy files into Final Cut Pro. And so usually if you're kind of burning your wheels, spending time letting Final Cut make those proxy files for you, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just link those actual Sony files to your actual Final Cut Pro file. And it doesn't matter if it's ZV-E1 or one of the other cameras like the ZV-E10, it is still available to you. So I put a link to that one in the info card and down in the description. But let's move over to the next tip because this one is one of my faves. Now, most people are familiar with the ability to have the My Dial settings or like customize the dials of your buttons and whatnot. That's not anything that's new, but what's new, at least new to me, is the My Dial setting on this camera. This is not something that I even saw on the ZV-E10, and I verified that. Now, depending on what I'm doing when I'm traveling and maybe I'm recording my talk and then I'm vlogging and then I get someplace where I can sit still and I want to record a dedicated video for the channel. Those are 3 different scenarios that I need to be able to switch on the go back and forth. Now, one of the main things that most creators kind of complained about or brought attention to when the ZV-E1 came out is the fact that you don't get a lot of physical buttons on the camera compared to something like the A6600. But that's not actually a bad thing because of some of the other things we're going to talk about in just a second here. But when I have the My Dial customized, I can get 3 different options by pressing one button. I don't need to change my video mode. I don't need to do anything. And this is available to me in photo and in video mode. So even though I've switched into 3 different scenarios, and it could be a rather fast succession throughout the day, I can literally hit one button, which for me would be the center button on the back of my camera, and my thumb dial, that thumb wheel that you have where your hand normally rests, it now can change from aperture priority, or I can change my ISO, or I can switch to changing my white balance, and a myriad of other options that are available to me simply by pressing one button. So it doesn't matter that the camera doesn't have a ton of buttons because my functionality and the ability to customize this camera has almost tripled. And that's just one of the settings that you can do this with. Next up has been something I was waiting and just so mad that it wasn't on my Sony ZV-E1, and it's super simple and it's not that big of a deal, so we're not going to belabor the point, but I've talked about it before, which is the auto exposure lock, which this was on these various cameras, but cameras like the ZV-E10 and the ZV-1, it was actually missing the auto white balance lock. So remember earlier I talked about the Shockless white balance? Okay, well, as it's gradually transitioning and it's looking very natural on camera, I can easily see which of those white balance settings actually looks good to my eye, and it's something that I just want the camera to stay right there. Well, I've assigned it for my downward directional button and my trash can icon to go ahead and do these 2 specific functions so that when I get to an automatic white balance that I like, I can just lock it and the camera will stay there. And if the exposure is good and I like that, then I can just lock that and toggle it on and it just stays there. This makes vlogging and on-the-go content creation that much easier because I don't have to work as hard. And as I'm going throughout the video, the settings won't change. So I can put my skills and knowledge that I know from being able to run my camera in full manual if I want to now just being able to freely create without any real issues or stresses trying to adjust all this little minutia stuff, and it still look great. Now here's a setting that most of everybody that has owned this camera and talked about this camera completely miss, because again, some of them just were not the ideal target audience for this camera, and so they skip over stuff, consider it a gimmick or whatever. But you can tell some of the A7S III people was a little salty, and that was about the anti-flicker setting in this camera. Now, I was recently at Ecamm's creator camp. You can kind of see I got my cabin poster board back there, my peeps. Shout out to the creative amplifiers. And while my friend Jill and I actually walked in and we were watching other people do like this wine tasting thing or what have you, I noticed that there were some Christmas lights and other decorations and stuff on the wall. Well, at first, those lights were flickering. Well, when I went ahead and hit this one button that read the lighting and some other technical stuff, it's not worth explaining right now, it actually matched up to the frequency of the electricity. No more flickering. Now, you may have heard that actually working in video, and that's fine. But most people don't realize that this setting works in photo mode. So everybody that complains about not having a physical shutter on the ZV-E1 missed the fact that the anti-flicker mode works in photo mode. So when I did an event with Ray Edwards and we were doing some photos of him just, casually reading his book and whatnot, well, I was noticing that there was some banding. Well, I went to just go to the anti-flicker setting. It was available. I can select it. boom, no more issues. So as he's interacting with people, as we have mixed lighting scenarios, this camera works for the banding with the anti-flicker setting. But if you're not a content creator, these are some of the things that I noticed that some people were skipping that you can take advantage of. So it doesn't matter if you're at a conference or if you're at an event. And I actually handed my camera off, and I only did one thing because the auto honestly worked really good. A little too bright in some scenarios or what have you, but I could give this camera and hand it off. And the only thing that I did was made sure that I set the anti-flicker for where he was going to be shooting at, handed him the camera, and went on about my business to keep working on some other stuff. And the photos didn't come out bad. So if you're indoors, you're in an environment and you notice the flickering, whether in photos or videos, use that anti-flicker mode. This right here has got to be one of my favorite. And this is one of those settings that people only notice that you can have some settings on the screen. You can swipe them away on the sides, but otherwise you don't really get anything with it. They're wrong. Most of these on-screen options are things that you want to stay on screen, and baked into this was a countdown timer. I know, revolutionary, but if you're with Ecamm, then you know how amazing that is to have something to count down and then you start recording. Well, now you have this baked into your camera in 3, 5, and 10-second intervals. So what this looks like in real life use application is I can sit, I can prepare. Usually I need to adjust my shirt. I'm doing this, you know, you're fixing your hair. And that's about anywhere from 3 to 5 seconds, sometimes 10, just to add a little bit of a buffer if you need to go from setting up the camera, positioning it, and then getting into position to either walk into the room or do whatever it is that you're going to do. All of that little time adds up over time, especially when you're sending this footage to a video editor or you're doing it yourself. It's just this extra fluff that you have to cut off. Not anymore. We can now adjust for how long it takes before the recording actually starts. So I do all of that shuffling and all that stuff off camera. And then when I see the countdown is like 2, 1, and then it starts recording, I can just start to deliver the first line. So when I import this into Final Cut Pro or I send this to my video editor, it just starts right on the money instead of having to have a bunch of weirdo stuff in the in-between in the beginning, because you can just start. That is a time saver made specifically for video creators. Thank you, Sony. And number 12 is by far something that when you look at all the stuff that I talked about, and this isn't even everything, these are just 12 things that I'm the most excited about as a video creator. Most people, again, they were kind of looking at the fact you don't get a lot of custom buttons. It's really not that big of a deal when you look at the amount of customization that you have. And Sony actually has been putting in work, camera after camera, year after year, trying to make their stuff better. And the ability to have 5 different versions of a camera menu, for some people can seem like, oh, that's overwhelming. No, it's actually not. You get 5 different options to access menus to honestly pick whatever your favorite flavor is or whatever works for you and just use that. You have the on-screen menu options, the quick function custom options, your main camera menu, your my menu custom options, and then you just have the regular full camera menu. That's 5 different camera options that you could be using based on whatever makes you feel comfortable. Now, the on-screen camera options, you can turn those off. The quick function ones that you swipe up and down, you can turn those off and just solely stick with the main menu where you have the big squares of the things that you commonly would use anyway as a creator. And then you can just stick with the my menu. And that's literally the only things that you would need other than when you first set the camera up and go through all the different settings to begin with. Or you can use a myriad of different options. What I find that I use the most are the on-screen swipeable options from the bottom and the sides, and then the my menu. And then that's it. I literally don't have to touch anything else. Now, I talked about all of these features and they may be great, but until you see how they're actually used in real life application, none of this stuff makes sense. And it can seem overwhelming, but I promise you it is super duper easy. And you don't have to copy exactly what I'm doing, but it puts you in the mindset to think about how you're creating and how you want to create, especially moving into this next year of content creation for yourself. And think about what are the ways that I plan to create and how can I help this camera to serve me the best so I can be more efficient, save more time, and have more creative freedom with my camera. And that video is coming up next. I'm going to be sharing with you how I customize my camera. Not all of the settings. That's another video we can link in up and down and all around. But I'm going to be sharing with you how I actually customize my buttons and my layout and how I go through that flow creatively to save me and my team a ton of time. And that video is on the screen right now. Go ahead and check it out because I know you're going to love it.